Good morning. After 51 years, the Carpenters remain one of the most successful music acts of all time. But that success also came with criticism, largely focused on their image.
And all I know of love is how to live without it.
What really happened backstage when two of the most hauntingly iconic voices in pop history crossed paths? For years, fans speculated, but one half of the answer stayed silent. Until now. ABBA's Agnetha Fältskog has finally opened up, not with drama, but with something more disarming: quiet truth. Her words have stirred curiosity across generations, especially about a single moment that, on the surface, seemed insignificant. But beneath that moment lies a shared weight neither artist ever fully revealed. Why does Agnetha still speak about Karen Carpenter decades later? The answer isn't what you'd expect. Something deeply personal has kept that memory alive, and once you hear it, you may never listen to their music the same way again. A rare encounter of icons. In 1978, a rare and memorable moment unfolded in Germany when two of pop music's most iconic female voices, Agnetha Fältskog of ABBA and Karen Carpenter of the Carpenters, shared a stage during the taping of the popular European television show Star Parade. At the time, ABBA was dominating global charts, with hits like Take a Chance on Me, while the Carpenters were still celebrated for their signature soft rock ballads despite Karen's private health battles. The episode, which aired on May 11th, featured performances by both groups and marked one of the few instances where two powerhouse acts from different corners of the music world were featured side by side. Although their meeting was brief and mostly off-camera, it held great significance, especially in hindsight, as it brought together two artists who shared far more in common than audiences could see. The environment was festive and high-profile, with producers aiming to spotlight the biggest names in pop. Agnetha and Karen were both at pivotal points in their careers. For ABBA, the late 70s represented their creative peak, while the Carpenters were attempting to maintain their relevance amidst evolving musical tastes. According to accounts from that time, including Agnetha's own recollection in later interviews, the backstage atmosphere was professional but warm. Karen performed Top of the World and Sweet, Sweet Smile, songs that captured the warmth and melancholy she was known for. Agnetha, known for her emotional depth and precision in vocal delivery, was said to be particularly moved by Karen's live performance, noting, "Her voice was something special." It is reported that their conversation was brief, but left an indelible mark on Agnetha's heart. Later, she would muse about the rarity of someone like Karen Howe, about an artist whose vocal quality could evoke emotions almost immediately. Equally remarkable was the simplicity and humility of Karen. Both women had a kind of introverted sensitivity that often sharply clashed with the demands of their careers and hence affected the world in which they lived. Karen herself was soft-spoken and reserved. Agnetha was playful and spontaneous, but she, too, avoided intense media scrutiny. Now, considering Karen Carpenter's personal issues, particularly her unspeakable problem with anorexia, one may wonder, was there something more that Agnetha sensed? At that time, few beyond Karen's inner circle understood the grip of the disorder. Still, Agnetha's memory of their encounter, which carried with it feelings of admiration and the recognition of another artist's abilities, suggests that the emotional currents were felt in that fleeting moment. That moment would gain renewed significance for Agnetha as she would later come to publicly lament the tragedy of Karen's death, speaking of the fragility that sometimes lies beneath even the strongest voices. What began as a backstage moment soon grew into something far more personal, one voice recognizing the quiet brilliance of another. Mutual respect between musical giants. Agnetha Fältskog's admiration for Karen Carpenter extended far beyond a single performance. In interviews years after their encounter on Star Parade, Agnetha described Karen's voice as something special, acknowledging its rare emotional resonance and technical purity. This sentiment wasn't just polite praise, it was a genuine reaction from one accomplished vocalist to another. Agnetha, known for her own rich and emotive delivery with ABBA, recognized in Karen a kindred spirit, someone who could deliver lyrics not only with clarity, but with an emotional weight that lingered. Her praise highlights how Karen's artistry transcended genre boundaries and left a mark even on those working in different musical spheres. Karen Carpenter's vocal style stood out in the pop world of the 1970s, and it's no surprise that someone like Agnetha, who also understood the demands of vocal precision, took notice. Karen's low, warm contralto was not only soothing, but capable of expressing vulnerability in a way few others could match. Agnetha noted this, saying Karen's voice touched you, and pointed out that it had an intimacy that made listeners feel as if they were being personally spoken to. While many fans and critics have described Karen's voice as melancholic or haunting, Agnetha emphasized the honesty in Karen's tone, a voice that, even when delivering cheerful melodies, revealed deeper layers of emotion beneath the surface. This respect pattern was grounded in factors apart from their technical prowess. Agnetha seemed to understand how intensely Karen's musical performances were intertwined with Karen's own emotional identity. Karen could take the simplest lyrics and make them mean something profound, and thus was something Agnetha greatly respected. From "We've Only Just Begun" right through to superstar, Karen never forced her performances. Agnetha admired the fact that Karen didn't have to oversing or to rely on theatrics to create a connection with the audience. Rather, it was that restraint that appealed to her. In a world where female artists were often expected to shine or go over the top, it was Karen's subtlety that stood out, and Agnetha knew it was sheer strength. At the time of their introduction, both Agnetha and Karen were at the height of their fame, which means that Agnetha likely saw some of that quiet fortitude in Karen as well. Although not in the public domain, Karen was suffering from health problems. Her emotional honesty may have given her performances much more than anyone had imagined. Agnetha's remembrance shows respect and empathy, and indicates she perceived Karen as not merely a musical peer, but also as a woman whose art was inseparable from her inner life. More importantly, their small encounter left Agnetha with mere admiration. It left a memory that every bit was an unforgettable voice. Parallel lives under the spotlight. Karen Carpenter and Agnetha Fältskog rose to fame as the defining voices of two globally beloved musical duos, the Carpenters and ABBA. While their sounds were distinct, their professional journeys were marked by striking similarities. Both women became international sensations in the 1970s, gaining massive followings with their groups and achieving chart-topping success. Karen, alongside her brother Richard, crafted a signature soft rock style, while Agnetha helped shape ABBA's iconic pop sound with Benny Andersson, Björn Ulvaeus, and Annie Frid Lyngstad. Despite these stylistic differences, the two singers shared an unspoken bond. They were often viewed as the emotional core of their respective groups, each delivering vocals that resonated deeply with audiences around the world. Their careers, however, were shaped by more than just talent. Both Karen and Agnetha operated within close creative partnerships, where collaboration often blurred into dependency. Karen's identity as a performer was heavily tied to Richard's vision and production decisions. Similarly, Agnetha, though a skilled songwriter and performer in her own right, was often overshadowed by ABBA's collective image and the songwriting dominance of Björn and Benny. In both cases, the women found their creative voices confined by the expectations placed upon them, despite being the most recognizable faces of their groups. Their ability to maintain professional composure in such controlled environments speaks volumes about their personal resilience. Life outside the studio was by no means any easier. Increasing fame brought with it an increasing pressure on both women to conform to public expectations. Karen's life was more and more dictated not just by her career, but also by issues stemming from family and health problems. In the meantime, Agnetha tussled with a loss of privacy while on long tours in an environment of incessant media attention, eventually retreating from the limelight for years. Neither woman would fit the prototype of a stereotypical celebrity. They cherished their privacy and a degree of normalcy, but were thrust into positions that demanded they be on display constantly, performing day after day. This tension often swung back to stress that they had to keep hidden from view. Though their paths crossed for only a short moment, Karen and Agnetha shared a parallel experience through navigating fame in restrictive settings. Theirs were glories that came with deep personal costs, involving much mute sacrifice and unseen emotional burden. On hindsight, it clearly reveals that behind their immaculate vocal performance were women deep in a struggle for self-preservation in an industry that made little allowance for vulnerability. The shared weight of fame and expectation. As prominent female vocalists in male-dominated musical groups, both Karen Carpenter and Agnetha Fältskog faced unique challenges that shaped not only their careers, but also their personal identities. While their talents were undeniable, they existed in professional environments where creative control often rested with male counterparts. In The Carpenters, Richard Carpenter managed production and direction, with Karen frequently expected to conform to his musical vision. In ABBA, the songwriting and production leadership belonged to Björn Ulvaeus and Benny Andersson, meaning Agnetha had limited influence over the group's direction, despite her being one of its most recognizable members. This lack of control contributed to internal tension, especially for artists like Karen and Agnetha, who were deeply connected to their craft. The public expectations placed on both women only intensified their struggles. As the faces of their respective groups, they were expected to maintain a polished, cheerful image, regardless of the emotional toll behind the scenes. For Karen, the pressure to appear perfect, slim, well-spoken, and endlessly graceful fueled her harmful obsession with weight and appearance. Agnetha, too, experienced the weight of these demands. Known as the blonde from ABBA, she was constantly in the public eye, praised for her beauty as much as her voice. But behind the image was someone who increasingly struggled with anxiety and the invasive nature of global fame. It was self-perception that these pressures influenced most in their lives. In contrast, public acclaim for Karen accompanied a deep sense of worthlessness within her family and her professional life. Internally, like Agnetha, who was already sensing the withdrawal long before the disbandment of ABBA, Karen would turn society outside, bearing the two conflicting sides of being loved publicly but criticized privately. While both reactions differ, Karen immerses into very dangerous cuttings, and Agnetha retreats entirely from the public. The reality is that they both reflect on how much strain it was living under public scrutiny without meaningful autonomy. The most remarkable point is that these issues were very little put forward or even addressed back then. It was very rare in the music industry of the 1970s for women to enjoy the emotional support and psychological resources they needed, especially if they were part of groups headed by men. A culture existed in which compromising and silent suffering, while keeping a marketable appearance, were normal. Their experiences show that fame could go much deeper into the crack created by systemic imbalances than even the most gifted and beloved performers. Sensing Karen's hidden pain. During their brief meeting on Star Parade in 1978, Agnetha Fältskog sensed something more in Karen Carpenter than just talent. While the backstage atmosphere was light and professional, Agnetha later admitted that she picked up on a quiet sadness beneath Karen's warm and humble exterior. Although Karen was gracious and composed in public, Agnetha felt a certain emotional distance in her demeanor, a subtle indication that something was not quite right. Years later, reflecting on that moment, Agnetha shared how she had been struck not just by Karen's voice, but by the emotion that seemed to linger even after the music stopped. At the time, very few outside of Karen's inner circle understood the extent of her battle with anorexia nervosa, a condition largely misunderstood and rarely discussed in public. Agnetha didn't know the details either, but her instincts as a fellow performer and someone who also struggled with the emotional toll of fame gave her a unique perspective. In her words, "It's one of those voices you love, but it also made you feel something more." That something more may have been Karen's internal suffering coming through in her performances, an emotional depth that resonated deeply with someone like Agnetha, who valued honesty in music above all. It was a quiet observation, yet one that did reveal much. While tabloids and critics judge on the basis of looks, chart positions, Agnetha responded to the emotional truth she sensed in Karen's presence. There had been no huge confrontation. There had been no real interrogative conversation. There was just an acknowledgement of one another's existence. Perhaps Agnetha, having gone through her own anxieties and pressures as a female pop icon, picked up something the others missed. Karen's voice, her gentleness, that careful image she controlled in public. The grit with which she held herself pushed down so deep and heavy inside her could not be easy to express. With hindsight, Agnetha's intuition would seem almost prophetic. Karen's untimely demise truly shocked the world in 1983, and only then did the public begin to appreciate the extent of her health issues. For Agnetha, those memories of a brief meeting probably took on greater currency over the years. It illustrates how a fleeting moment can encapsulate tremendous meaning, especially among artists who understand too well what it takes to bury pain behind performance. Agnetha's quiet intuition was only the beginning. What followed would reveal just how deep the unseen struggle truly ran. The hidden reality behind the voice. Karen Carpenter's struggle with anorexia nervosa was a silent, devastating battle that remained largely hidden from the public during her lifetime. At a time when eating disorders were poorly understood, even within the medical community, Karen's condition went undiagnosed for years. By the mid-1970s, her weight had dropped to alarming levels, yet much of the focus around her appearance was framed in compliments rather than concern. Those close to her noted her increasing reliance on laxatives and thyroid medication, yet her health crisis was often minimized or dismissed, even by her family. What few knew was that Karen's illness had become a controlling force in her life, one that dictated her daily routines and sapped her strength, even as she continued to perform. The severity of Karen's anorexia became more widely known only after her tragic death in 1983. New insights from biographies and medical reports revealed the extremes she endured. At one point, she was reportedly taking 80 to 90 laxatives a night and had become dependent on ipecac syrup, which slowly damaged her heart. In 1982, she sought treatment with psychotherapist Stephen Levenkron in New York, a bold step considering her family's skepticism toward therapy. Though she began making progress in sessions, the toll on her body was irreversible. Karen's weight had dropped to 77 pounds by the time she was admitted to Lenox Hill Hospital. Despite a brief period of physical recovery, the years of malnourishment had weakened her heart beyond repair. Moreover, there was a lack of awareness about or sensitivity towards mental health and body image issues within the entertainment industry, complicated by the above. While facing a potentially fatal illness with secretive stubbornness, Karen was expected to maintain a flawless public appearance. Much speculation would focus on her style, her voice, and her performances, but very little on her health, even as her appearance within all of this started to become much more alarming. Anorexia was in those times something not spoken of openly, and very few considered it to be a real mental illness. In many respects, Karen's uniquely tragic tale unearthed the gaping holes in the health and wellness understanding of the industry. Karen Carpenter's fight with anorexia has since become one of the key cases that educated people about eating disorders to such a level that she herself became a victim of that delay. Her story remains one of great talent, overshadowed by hidden pain. The voice that comforted millions was something else altogether, behind the curtain wailing for help, of how appearances often hide the need for suffering, and how lack of understanding may cost lives, even of those who seem brightest. Anxiety and isolation, post-ABBA. While Karen Carpenter's health issues were eventually brought to light through medical records and biographical accounts, Agnetha Fältskog's struggles largely unfolded out of the public eye. After ABBA's final performance in 1982, Agnetha gradually withdrew from the spotlight, choosing to live a more private life in Sweden. Her decision wasn't just a matter of preference. It was shaped by years of emotional exhaustion, anxiety, and a growing discomfort with the pressures of global fame. Unlike many celebrities who transitioned into solo careers immediately, Agnetha took a step back, indicating that the toll of international stardom had reached a breaking point. Agnetha has spoken candidly in later interviews about her fear of flying, her sensitivity to the press, and her desire for solitude. She admitted that the constant travel and intense touring schedules with ABBA left her feeling emotionally drained. Even at the height of the group's success, she was reluctant to leave her children for extended periods and found the invasiveness of fame difficult to manage. These anxieties led her to decline major international appearances and avoid prolonged engagements in the public eye. Her retreat from fame was not fueled by ego or disinterest, but rather a protective measure for her mental health, something that wasn't widely understood or supported in the 1980s. Hard to ignore the personification of the emotional parallels of Karen Carpenter. Both were that emotional heart that turned out to be part of hugely successful music groups, and both were quietly battling their internal demons while still putting on a facade of poise and perfection. Agnetha may not have succumbed to an eating disorder like Karen, but her physical problems, anxiety, isolation, and the weight of public expectation echo a number of those same emotional pressures that Karen faced. The difference is that Agnetha had managed to carve out space for healing through retreat from the industry, an option clearly not fully explored, or perhaps not allowed, for Karen. Looking back, Agnetha may have preserved more of herself than fame might have allowed her through the privacy of her life. It emphasizes the importance of listening to internal alarm signals and making them act in time to prevent strains from turning into crises. Speaking of Karen Carpenter later in life, Agnetha didn't just mourn a talented peer, but also subtly acknowledged a shared understanding of what it feels like to be overwhelmed, under-supported, and expected to carry on regardless. That empathy molded by his experience adds gravity to each and every word he has uttered in memory of Karen. A missed opportunity for sisterhood and support. In hindsight, the brief meeting between Agnetha Fältskog and Karen Carpenter in 1978 feels like a poignant moment, filled with missed potential. Both women were navigating the height of their careers while quietly enduring emotional and psychological challenges. Though they only exchanged a few words backstage at Star Parade, their similarities, musical sensitivity, introverted nature, and the pressures of fame suggest they could have formed a powerful and supportive friendship. It is tempting to wonder what might have happened if their paths had crossed under different circumstances in a world more attuned to the emotional toll of stardom. At the time, mental health was not a subject openly discussed in the entertainment industry, especially among female artists. Emotional resilience was expected, not nurtured. Had there been more awareness or institutional support, perhaps Karen and Agnetha might have connected beyond that fleeting interaction. Both women were known for their empathy and emotional intelligence, traits that, if given the chance, could have created a bond of mutual understanding and comfort. Agnetha, having also struggled with anxiety and public pressure, may have offered a listening ear or a kindred voice that Karen sorely needed. There was never a nurturing atmosphere in the late 1970s music industry relationships among female counterparts. Despite the hushed-up atmosphere, it was based on competition in the extreme to its very core, and exposing one's broken spirit self in strength was mostly treated as a disadvantage. Had it been different? Had culture in the music biz allowed and even encouraged female peers to support and be there emotionally, as in might have been situations of Karen's being alone in her suffering, would not have existed, or at least, one plight Karen found herself in could have been covered by an understanding and offered her emotional relief or moments of clarity. Likewise, for Agnetha, such a connection would have reduced her spirit of despair and provided her with that safe space to voice her concerns and fears without judgment. Thus, The lost connection between the two showcases a greater inadequacy within the music industry in supporting mental health. In an era that encouraged silencing oneself instead of demanding self-expression, the senior stars, Karen and Agnetha, were left to garner what remained of their strength in the fight against loneliness. This particular blend of allies serves the purpose today for being emblematic of how a sense of comradeship was just beginning to forge. Their unity through music would have been their last claim to martyrdom. In the final analysis of their stories, one notices how much is needed to create environments that will allow emotional bonds and dialogue to be supported and even nurtured in the first place. Aftermath of Karen's death. Karen Carpenter's sudden death in 1983 deeply affected not just fans and family but also fellow musicians, especially those who had briefly crossed paths with her and recognized the quiet intensity behind her voice. Agnetha Fältskog, who had only met Karen once during the Star Parade taping in 1978, later spoke with a tone of solemn reflection when recalling the loss. Though their encounter had been brief, the news of Karen's death stirred something lasting in Agnetha. In later interviews, she acknowledged feeling a profound sadness, not just for the loss of such a rare voice, but for the personal pain Karen had endured in silence. For Agnetha, Karen's passing became a stark example of how the pressures of fame could devastate even the most composed public figures. Agnetha had always been sensitive to the emotional costs of stardom, having dealt with anxiety, media scrutiny, and the exhaustion of global touring. Karen's story validated many of Agnetha's own unspoken concerns about the music industry's failure to support artists' mental health. She admitted that Karen's death forced her to think more critically about the environment they both operated in, one that often demanded perfection but offered little care in return. The tragedy has also put into perspective how emotionally vulnerable artists can be, and Karen was one of such individuals whose strong and graceful exterior hid terrible interior battles that could not be understood by the watching world. Karen's death has given me sharper focus on that reality. Agnetha often says when she reflects on how artists suffer in silence, keeping alive the myth of smiling for the cameras while lugging heavy personal baggage. For Agnetha, that was a painful reminder that fame does not insulate one from suffering. Sometimes, it actually heightens the intensity of the agonies. The psychological toll taken on artists, especially women, seldom saw the light of open discussion, thus making it even morbid for stories like those of Karen. Agnetha has a paean to that clarity with which she now sees the emotional scalpel reality of fame piercing the surface of all glitter. While she never claimed to have known Karen well, her reflections on Karen's life and death have always been filled with empathy and sincerity. And right here, if one cared to think about it, was a mark on Agnetha, the reminder of the need for some compassion, some vulnerability, some viewing of the human being behind the performance. This is what makes Karen's legacy, for Agnetha, not merely musical, but, more importantly, very personal. The impact of Karen's loss didn't end with grief. It sparked something in Agnetha that still echoes through her words today. The enduring legacy. Even decades after Karen Carpenter's passing, Agnetha Fältskog continues to speak about her, not out of obligation but from a place of enduring respect and quiet reflection. In various interviews, Agnetha has mentioned Karen not just as an exceptional vocalist, but as someone whose emotional depth transcended performance. Their brief meeting in 1978 left a deeper impression than anyone could have anticipated at the time, and Karen's legacy has continued to resonate with Agnetha on both personal and professional levels. It's not about nostalgia. For Agnetha, Karen represents a reminder of what often goes unseen in the lives of celebrated performers. What compels Agnetha to revisit Karen's memory is likely the recognition of shared experiences, being women at the center of global success, yet struggling with emotional burdens that were rarely acknowledged publicly. Agnetha, who has spent much of her post-ABBA life away from the spotlight, understands the isolating nature of fame. She has often spoken about her own battles with anxiety and her discomfort with media exposure. In Karen, she saw not only a remarkable artist, but a fellow woman trying to maintain her identity under immense pressure. This sense of kinship, though only briefly expressed in person, continues to influence the way Agnetha remembers her. This is Karen's story, in which Agnetha has an opinion. The story, which is still very relevant, is about the artist who, though performing in a performance-oriented industry, is always failing to attend to the mental and emotional sides of an artist. Keeping alive the memory of Karen's story in public memory will thus indirectly advocate a more humane understanding of fame and artistry. It's a way to honor an unfinished peer whose struggle was largely unnoticed until it was too late. The continued references to Karen are not at all sentimental gestures. Behind these such references is a sincere desire to appreciate emotional reality beyond the facade that is so often expected from performers. Finally, Agnetha doesn't stop talking about Karen Carpenter because Karen's voice and her story will leave a lasting imprint. Both a fan and fellow artist, her character is that of someone who has felt personally the tension between public success and private heartache. For Agnetha, Karen's legacy is more than music. It speaks about keeping in memory the person behind the voice and using that memory to raise awareness of the need for empathy, emotional consciousness, and support in an industry all too often devoid of attention to its human cost. If this story moved you or gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like the video, comment below with your thoughts or memories of Karen and Agnetha, and subscribe for more untold stories behind music's most unforgettable voices. And before you go, watch the next video on your screen for more behind-the-scenes insights you won't want to miss.